Paweł Adamowicz is dead, now it's time for Polish war. After the assassination of the president of Gdansk, Paweł Adamowicz, Poland found itself in a dangerous moment. It is known that the murderer is a former prisoner who shouted into the microphone that he killed Adamowicz from vengeance on the civic platform, which put him in prison. Nevertheless, the opposition is trying to create the impression that law and justice is responsible for the murder. Very dangerous emotions are being unleashed. Mainly hatred against each other, presented by both feuding Polish tribes. After the assassination of the president of Gdansk, the opposition demands the end of freedom of speech, which is called the fight against hate speech. He tries to convince the public that the murder of Adamowicz is the result of some statements used in the last local election campaign. In other words, it was decided to play a political theater on the grave of the unfortunate Paweł Adamowicz and win something on it. It has been suggested that there are entries on the internet. The Polish police have even begun pursuing those who wrote what they should not have done, and the Interior Minister Joachim Brudzinski himself threatened them with his entry. It turns out that in Poland we have a peculiar concept of freedom of speech, as something that is implicitly limited, and only defined bans are defined by sticking to them a patch of hate speech. It is also symptomatic that the postulate of restricting speech is put up 8 days before the adoption of internet censorship in the European Union, called File 2. It is cynical that people who are allegedly struggling with hatred are also masters in arousing her in relation to others. It can unfortunately be a tactic that successfully cements the so-called iron electorate. In the emotionally unstable, mobilized believers, this minimizes the risk of choosing on the electoral card other options than the civic platform are law and justice, and yet the two main parties are concerned. It is difficult to say what this will lead to if people do not remember, and the fact that the election is twice this year does not set positive, because despite such dramatic circumstances it is difficult to count on reflection and self-control. On the contrary, emotions will grow until October, and who knows what else can happen. It is also symptomatic that the left does not mention the need for capital punishment for murderers such as Stefan W. Progressives believe that this is an inhumane final punishment, which cannot be undone, and it is revenge on the perpetrator. This is not true, because the death penalty is the foundation of justice. The perpetrator of yesterday's attack deserved it like no other. The behavior of the Orchestra of Christmas Charity, Jerzy Ozyak, is also controversial. He only stopped the final of the orchestra, at the moment of the tragedy, and then he continued as if nothing had happened. Today, in turn, when it was already known that Paweł Adamowicz was dead, Jerzy Ozyak resigned from the position of the president of the foundation of the Christmas Charity Orchestra and declared that he felt like he was in Auschwitz because he was insulted by Plastuza on Telewizja Polska Info. It is difficult to even comment. Perhaps this strange behavior of the head of the Orchestra of Christmas Charity and emotional resignation is somehow related to the concerns about possible prosecutors' charges for the organizers of the 27th Orchestra of Christmas Charity due to the improper security of the event on which the attack took place. Everything, however, indicates that the organizer of the unlucky concert, for taxpayers' money, was the city of Gdansk, therefore the concerns of the board of the Christmas Charity Orchestra. For liability, they seem exaggerated. It is very sad when human life is interrupted so brutally. Paweł Adamowicz survived only 53 years. His murderer will continue to live, and in prison he will enjoy the status of an outstanding individual. This is probably the hardest thing to reconcile on a day like today. Polish police announces that he is arresting for comments on the internet. Correct actions are blatant violation of freedom of speech. The Polish police has launched a campaign to intimidate internet users who post stupid and aggressive comments online. The policemen visit the authors' houses and detain them. The whole action was boasted on Twitter by the head of the Ministry of Interior, Joachim Brudzinski. Politicians got a kitten after murdering one of them during the final of the Great Orchestra of Christmas Charity. It is hardly surprising, one of them is attacked, that is why they start to fear for their lives, not excluding possible followers of the murderer Paweł Adamowicz. For this reason, the leftist party Law and Justice, supported by other leftist organizations and organizations who considered themselves a right, began to hunt internet users who wrote not very wise and emotional comments. Despite the obvious fact that the murder of the president of Gdansk was committed by a criminal who, as he himself shouted, took revenge on the PO member for the fact that this party, in his opinion, is responsible for his imprisonment, we have always heard the tirades since the death of Pavel Adamovich hate speech that supposedly led to this tragedy. It is hard not to get the impression that something was decided on the occasion of this misfortune. This intrusive narrative is used to take on the occasion of the Gdansk attack to tighten the more proverbial screw in terms of freedom of speech, simply scaring people and making demonstrative arrests. Similar methods were used by German and French police officers when there were statements criticizing the invasions of Islamists called refugees. In fear of the consequences, this led to fear of public statements in both countries. Probably the same intimidating effect they want to achieve the rulers in Poland. At present it is probably the safest to write nothing at all, because the evolution of understanding what is and what is not hate speech is so fast that it is impossible to determine what is not allowed to speak anymore. Polish police should create a website with guidelines and write there in black and white which is allowed in Poland, and what is not allowed, because people really believe that there is freedom of speech, so it may be better to get them out of error instead of them race and make demos with arrests. The sad thing is that the principle of freedom of speech written in the Polish constitution is just an empty record. Freedom of speech in our country has been targeted by the authorities and leftist organizations that have long imposed the terror of political correctness, usurping the right to decide who to say. Obviously, aggressive, offensive and unwise statements happen on the internet all the time. But what else when someone says, and what else when the speech is put into action? However, if we recognize that someone at the police station may decide that someone's epithets are too offensive and based on publicly undefined premises, then we accept a serious violation of freedom of speech.